In this video, we'll have a look at exporting your game from Unity to a platform of your choosing. We'll go over how you can build for Windows, Mac, and WebGL. This might not be the most interesting of videos, but it's something that every developer has to do at some point. At least I hope so. Let's get started. So let's start by opening our Build Settings menu. We'll go File, Build Settings. Make sure to add all the scenes you want in your build. And you can see here that we have a long list of platforms. The default one is the PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. You can easily switch to other platforms by simply selecting them and hitting this Switch Platform button. However, lately, Unity has made the different platforms into optional modules that you can install with Unity. So in my case, I've installed PC, Mac, and Linux standalone, Android, and WebGL. However, I did not include any of the others. Luckily, we can simply select one of the modules. It's going to say that the module isn't loaded. We can just hit open download page and Unity will automatically start downloading that module. Simply run through the installer, restart Unity, and you should see it there. But no matter what platform we want to build for, there are a few things that we need to set up. The first one is to go to Edit, Project Settings, and then Quality. In here we are able to set the different rendering settings. And the cool thing about this is that we can separate it into different levels. And we can have each platform default to a certain quality level. So right now we are viewing our game at Fantastic. That means a pixel light count of 4, full res texture quality, and so on and so on. But if we switch to the other levels, we can see these settings change. We can add new levels or delete some. I think we should go ahead and delete some of these levels. I'm going to delete the fastest, the simple, and the beautiful. I think 3 is plenty for our game. For Fantastic, I'm going to set the pixel light count to 10, keep the texture settings. I'm going to bump up the anti-aliasing to 8, and I'm going to leave all other settings as is. Then for Good, I'm going to set the pixel light count to 4, anti-aliasing to 2, and keep all the other settings. And for Fast, we can have the pixel light count be 2, and I probably also want to have hard shadows only. Cool, so this way we have 3 different quality levels. I'm going to set the standalone to Fantastic, Android we can just go ahead and set that to Fast, and WebGL to Good. But you'll of course have to experiment with these settings depending on the complexity of your game. Next up we need to change the player settings. To do that we go Edit, Project Settings, and then Player. And in here we have the different build settings. First off we have the company name. I'm gonna write Brackeys. We have the product name. Let's write CubeThon. And then we can choose a default icon, and you can even change the cursor if you want to. I'm going to leave the cursor as is, but I do definitely want a build icon. Now of course you are going to have to create this somehow. I recommend using Photoshop or GIMP. In my case, I'm just going to take a screenshot of our game and then load that into Photoshop and edit it a bit. This way we can pretty easily create a cool looking icon for the game. But you should really go nuts and just have fun with it. Creating icons can be challenging, but it's also a really good thing to learn. Alright, so when you're done with your logo, just save it as a PNG to make sure that you get the transparency you need. Or if you made it in Photoshop, you can just save it as a Photoshop file. So I'm just going to take this image here and save it directly into my project. So I'll go to how to make a video game and save it under assets. And I'm just going to call this one CubeThon and then icon. Save that. And now in Unity, we should see it appearing. Make sure to select the icon and change the texture type to Sprite 2D and UI. And under compression, we'll select none. Let's save that. And that should give us some transparency and make sure our image isn't compressed. Now we can go again, Edit, Project Settings, Player, and drag in our icon. So from here on out, it's going to depend on what platform you want to export to. So on the screen now, you will have some timestamps that you can jump to if you want to skip ahead to a specific platform. So if you want to build a standalone file, meaning PC, Mac, or Linux, we need to change the player settings on this tab. First we'll go Resolution and Presentation. Here we can change whether or not we prefer to have the window in full screen or windowed mode. I think because we are making a casual game, we would like it to open up in windowed, and the default width and height is fine here. You can also choose whether or not you would like to display the resolution dialog. This is a small window that pops up before your game, which enables the player to choose a quality level and a preferred resolution. Again, since this is a mini game, I think we should just disable this. We can also easily make the window resizable, and we can pretty much go ahead and support all aspect ratios. Then under your icon, we can just leave everything as is. Unity is going to go ahead and build different sizes of our icon for us. Under the splash image, we can configure stuff like the banner image shown in the dialog box. We of course don't have that enabled, so we don't care about that. And the splash screen that is going to show when you start up the game. Of course, if you are not using Unity Pro, your options here are going to be limited, but it's very cool that you can easily add different logos to the splash screen, customize the animation and the colors. You can always go ahead and hit preview and it's going to show you what it will look like. In our case, I'm just going to change the background image to a white and change the splash dial to dark on light. This way it fits better with the rest of our game. Finally, we have other settings. These can be important for larger games, but for now, you're definitely not going to need to change anything here. Finally, we need to go to File, build settings, and this is where we choose our target platform. So again, here it's going to depend on whether or not you want to install for Windows or Mac, and again I have some timestamps on the screen. So if you're building for Windows, you of course want to select Windows as the target platform. As the architecture, you'll have to choose between 32 and 64-bit. Almost any modern system will do fine running 64-bit. However, our game probably won't benefit too much from the difference here, so I'm just going to go on the safe side and choose 86, which is equal to 32-bit. We don't want to copy any files, and we don't want this to be a development build. So now we can just go ahead and hit build. We can go and make a new folder under the how to make a video game project, and let's call this one builds. Inside of this, we can create another folder called Windows, and just to stay totally organized, we'll create yet another subfolder called x86, and in here we can then write the name of our game, so that means Cubethon, and then x86, and you can also write a version number for your game, but I'm just gonna go ahead and hit save. So now Unity will build all of the necessary files and open up the folder. So you can see here that we now have an exe file with a nice icon and a data folder containing all of the stuff necessary to run our game. If we run the exe, it's going to open up a new window with our game, and the game is already totally playable. However, these files here aren't too easy to distribute. You can of course go ahead and zip them up by right clicking on them both, hitting send to, and then compress zip folder. And now you can send this single file to your friends, ask them to unzip it and then play the game. But that's not too user friendly. What most games do is create an installer. That means just a single file that you open up, and then you're going through the install process. This way the user can choose where he wants the program to be installed. You can have desktop shortcuts and an easy way to uninstall the game. Unity won't do that for us. We need some third-party software that will turn these files into a setup file. What I like to use is a program called InnoSetup. So if you go to the description, there will be a link to this page. If we then go down here and choose a download site, I'm going to go InnoSetup 5.5.9.exe, choose random site, and it's going to start downloading. It's a very small program. You can then run through the installer, and once you're done, you can go ahead and open up InnoSetup compiler. So InnoSetup allows you to customize so many things when it comes to creating the installer. In fact, it even allows you to edit the script file that makes it. But if you don't have experience creating these sort of files from scratch, and let's face it, not a lot of people do, we can go and create a new script file using the script wizard. So let's hit OK, let's select next, and here we can fill out all of the information. Application name, Cubethon, the application version, 1.0, the publisher, Brackeys, and I'm just going to link to my YouTube channel here. Select next. We'll just have the destination base folder be the program's file folder, and this is fine for the folder name. Let's select next, and this is where we need to tell the installer what files it needs to install on the system. So we'll go ahead and select browse, and now we need to find our project, our builds folder, and then our exe file. So I'm just going to go to desktop, projects, go to the how to make a video game Unity project, go builds, Windows, x86, and select Cubethon x86.exe. Hit open. So now we've linked it to the main executable file, but we also need to include all of the data. And this is where it becomes a little bit weird. We can make InnoSetup also install all of the data within this folder. But when it does that, it doesn't include the folder itself, only all of its contents. That means that when we install it, we're going to have our Cubethon x86.exe, and then at the same level, all of these files. But we need this to be in a separate folder, or else the exe cannot find the data it needs. To make sure this is what happens, we need to wrap this inside of yet another folder. So we'll go ahead and copy the name of this folder, create a new custom folder. Let's just name this one data. We'll then take the Cubethon x86 data folder and move it to the newly created data folder. And now we can take our data folder and paste the name back in. This means that inside of our data folder is another data folder that contains everything we need. And you can see the hierarchy up here. It's a bit weird that we need to do this, but as long as you know this trick, it works every time. So now we can go back to InnoSetup, hit add folder. We can again locate our project. And once you get to the Windows x86 folder, you need to select the topmost Cubethon data folder. Not the bottom one, or it's not gonna work, but the folder we just made. Let's now hit OK, and it needs to include all of the subfolders. We'll then hit next, and you can choose the default settings you want here. I'm gonna hit next. You can even input a license file and show some information here and there. I'm just gonna hit next. English is fine as the language. So as the custom compiler output folder, we'll go ahead and hit browse. Again, let's find our project, go into builds, and then under Windows, let's go ahead and make a new folder, and let's call this one installer. Let's hit OK. As the name of our output file, we'll set Cubethon setup and then x86 in parentheses. You can even include a custom setup icon file or a password, but I'm just gonna use the default one, and I don't need that level of security. Let's then hit next. finish, and in our setup we'll now go ahead and create a script with all of the settings that we just set. And you can go in here and change anything that you'd like. The scripting language is fairly easy to understand. Or you could just go ahead and compile the new script right away. Let's do that by hitting yes. You can also choose to save the script before compiling. This is a good idea if you want to go back and change something at a later point. So we'll just hit yes. And again, we'll go under builds. And this time we'll go under Windows and installer. And we'll choose as the file name here, kubethon setup script. Let's hit save. It's going to go ahead and compile our file. You can see here it says finished. Now we can open up our builds, Windows, installer folder. And in here we now have the kubethon setup x86.exe. And this file is now all we need to distribute. The script file here can just be totally ignored. We can go ahead and delete it if we are satisfied with the results. So let's close down setup and Unity. And if we now go ahead and run our setup file, we'll hit yes. We can go through the installer to our own program. I'm just going to install it in the default location. I'm going to create a desktop icon, hit install, and you can see that we get the option to launch kubethon and a shortcut down here to the game. So if we double click that, it is now going to boot up our game. And you can also uninstall the game as with any other program on your system. So if you want to build for Mac, you should of course change the target platform to macOS X. And when it comes to distributing on the Mac, there are two main possibilities. The first one is using the Mac App Store, and this can be quite a complicated process. You also need to change around a few of the build settings, and there's a lot of work to be done after you export it from Unity. You could also take your build and turn it into a DMG that you can then distribute through your website, Dropbox, or any other file sharing solution. I will have a link to a guide for both in the description. Let's have a look at actually building the game into an app. To do that, we first select the architecture. x86 means 32-bit and _64 means 64-bit. Universal means that it will run on both, but this will also be twice as big. Any new computer will have no problem supporting 64-bit, but since our game is this small, we might as well choose 32. We don't want this to be a development build, so let's just go ahead and hit build. And as you can see, I've gone ahead and created a folder inside of our project called builds. Double click on that, and in here we can create a new folder, and we'll call this one Mac, and inside of that we'll create another subfolder called x86. So let's just go inside of the x86 folder and hit select. Unity is going to build everything for us, and it's going to open it like this, and it's a bit weird that Unity opens it this way. We'll just take the app folder here and move it inside of the x86, and now we can rename this to anything we'd like. I'm going to rename this to kubethon and then x86. Now on Windows this is going to display as an ordinary folder, so we can simply open it and see all of the contents. But on Mac this should display as an app that you can then just open up. If you want an easy way of sending this from one system to another, you can right click, go send to, and then compress zip folder. This will turn it into a zip file. We then remove the .app in the name here, and we now have a zip folder containing our app. And if you're building this on a Mac, again you can either upload it to the Mac App Store or turning it into a DMG. I check the links in the description. So if you want to build for WebGL, select the WebGL platform. And again, if you haven't included this when installing Unity, make sure to click the open download page and download that module. There are not a lot of settings for this, however, we do need to have a look at the player settings. So let's click player settings, and let's go to the last tab here, which is for WebGL. Let's have a look under resolution and presentation. In here you can choose a default screen width and height. This can very easily be modified later in the HTML. I'm just going to leave it as is. You can also choose a template. The default one includes a Unity logo, a way to maximize the screen, and maybe also the title of your game and stuff, and some other pretty handy things. I think for most people it's a good idea to just choose the default one and then modify it, but you can of course also go with the totally minimal one. So I'm going to select default. WebGL doesn't include an icon, so that doesn't matter. On the splash image we can customize the intro screen. You can see what it looks like right now if I hit preview. I've chosen a background color that's very white. As the splash style, I've chosen dark on light. You can also play with the animation, add custom logos, and of course some of these features are pro only, but I still think you can customize it a bit in the free version. Let's then go other settings. You can pretty much leave all these settings as is, and the same with the publishing settings. Some people prefer bumping up the WebGL memory size, but with a game this big I think 256 is going to be just fine. So now we can just go ahead and hit build, and as you can see I've created a builds folder inside of our how to make a video game project. Let's go under that. Let's create another folder called WebGL, and under this one let's create a folder called kubethon. Let's select that, select folder, and Unity will now start building. Exporting for WebGL does take quite a bit of time, and it might look like it's getting stuck, especially at the last last part here, but it will get there. So when it's done, it's going to open up the WebGL folder, and you can see our Kubethon folder here with the different elements that make up our game. First off, we have the index.html. This is what you run in order to display the game in your browser. We also have some template data. This is basically just some images, a bit of styling, and a JavaScript file that is referenced by our HTML file in order to display our game nicely. On the release, we have the files that actually make up our game. I've never actually come across an instance where I needed to mess with these. Only template data and index.html. So if we open up index.html, we get this error. It says that the browser does not support running this WebGL content locally, that we need to set it up on a server and then connect to it. We're gonna click OK a couple of times, and you can see the template, but the game isn't working. Of course, you can solve this problem if you have a web server, or you can create one yourself, but most of the time you probably want some way of running your game locally. So what we can do instead is use Firefox. If you don't have Firefox already, go ahead and download it, and then right click and say open with Firefox. As of this video, Firefox supports running these games locally, and you can see it working just fine. It might take a little while before it boots though. So now we can actually play our game inside of the browser. But how can we distribute our game? Well, here we have a few different options. The first one is hosting your game yourself. If you've bought some server space, you can use a file management solution like FileZilla in order to upload your file to that server. But most people probably just want to host it on some kind of marketplace. The most common ones for indie games are probably Congregate and itch.io. I will have links in the description on how to add Unity games to both of them. One thing that you sometimes have to do is compress this folder. We do that by selecting the folder, right clicking, going send to, and then compressed zip folder. On the Mac, you simply right click and hit compress. We can also go in directly and edit the HTML. So if we right click on this index file, we can open with some kind of text editing software. That could be Node++, Visual Studio, but I like to use Sublime Text. Now we can edit the HTML that makes up this template. We can add custom styling, change the height and width. We can add custom elements or delete elements. For example, if we wanted to have a very minimalistic template, we could go ahead and delete both the title, the full screen button, and the logo. So now when we save this and run it again, we can see that all this stuff is gone. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future one. I upload Sundays and Wednesdays. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in March, and a special thanks to Derek Heemskirk, Faisal Marify, James Kellhound, and Jason the Tito. If you want to support the channel and become a patron yourself, you can do so at patreon.com/Brackeys. Thanks a lot, guys.